feels so funny talking about after just ever have that when
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Transitioning from
Hello, 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 hello. Hello.
hey, yo,
Hey, how are you?
Hi, good. I don't know, were you two wanting to do video or were you just wanting to be on audio? I'm okay with either.
well, I'm on now. I don't have my camera even. I'm gonna
Oh,
be.
okay. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Let me just boost your audio just a tiny bit.
Oh, sure. Sorry, I was
And
also kicked back in my chair. I might be
oh,
louder if
oh,
I'm
okay.
closer to my
Okay.
mic.
Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah, I'll try
So
to
now
stay
it should be a
close.
little sick. Okay, let me just adjust these audio levels real quick. I just want to make sure that it's
Yeah,
good.
no
Can you both
worries.
give me like a
It's
test?
yep.
First you ask yourself.
Yeah, A, B, C, D,
Perfect.
E. Okay.
Perfect. And Avi?
Hey, how you doing?
I
Coming
think I
through
said your
loud.
name right? Avi?
Avi.
Avi. Sorry, my bad.
Kind of
Yeah,
like
no worries.
obvi, like obviously, obvi.
Ah, excellent. All right, so let's get these names up here. So we got ask yourself. Pronouns?
He,
He.
her, he, him. Sorry, he, him. And yeah.
Avi?
He, him.
Okay. All righty. All righty. So let's get this up on the screen so that everybody can see it. Excellent. All right. So if you two would like to introduce yourselves to my stream, some of my stream I believe is familiar with you. Some of them are not. But if you would both just sort of take turns, ask yourself, I guess go first because I have you on the name list first, and then Avi afterwards if you want to introduce yourself and whatever to the stream. That'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Isaac. I mean, call me by my actual name or by ask yourself. I have a YouTube channel, talk about philosophy mostly, lots of stuff around like animal ethics, but sometimes I touch on topics like trans topic. I don't know if there's. What about you, Avi?
Hey, I'm Avi. I'm a medical doctor, currently working in New York, and I work in various clinical trials, both investigator initiated and sponsor initiated. I have a YouTube channel as well. I debate various topics, also related to animal ethics, but more broadly, medical topics, nutrition related topics, and philosophical topics as well.
Um, and for I don't know, are either of you streaming? I don't know if you are streaming right now, but if you are, I can introduce myself to your audiences. I don't know if either of you are streaming.
I'm recording,
Uh,
so I think it would be good.
oh, okay. Sick. Yeah. My name is Demon Mama. I stream on YouTube. I am a political edutainer, and I talk about a wide variety of topics. I am a non-binary trans woman, so I talk about trans stuff quite frequently. But I also talk about quite a lot of other things. Yeah. So come check out my stuff. I'm sure you'll find it very very interesting. Yeah. So that's me. Excellent. So today, we have gathered here to discuss the discuss gender identity and the philosophy, underlying philosophy of it, and also the potential issue uh, of a infinite regress, which was something that came up in a now infamous discussion, off the cuff discussion that I had a couple weeks ago. And since then I've thought on it a lot, reviewed on it a lot, and I'm very interested to have this conversation with both of you, because I'm of course interested in understanding opinions that are different than mine and discovering where we stand on things.
Yeah,
Does
well,
that sound agreeable?
course it sounds
Yeah, awesome.
agreeable. Yeah, we
Yeah.
really appreciate your time actually. It's good to be able to kind of clear up stuff on this topic. And it's worth saying a lot of people like just refuse to engage with anyone who's got like kind of criticism of. So, although the bar should not be set like that, we still appreciate anyone who clears it by like having the what I take to be sort of like basic decency want to talk about their views. But yeah, we really we appreciate that. And it's okay with you. We also just want to kind of like clear the air for maybe just like a minute here before we
Hmm.
get into the actual substance. That's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, so just a few things. So right off the bat, because this all arose from that conversation with Riley, just full cards on the table. We should probably disclose our relationship, Riley. So in Avi's case, he's a friend of hers. Not close friend really. They've known each other for a few months, and it's largely in the context of him helping her. Their friendship is in the context largely of him helping her certain like empirical topics and phil topics. And I've only talked to her for about 2 minutes, at which point I was muted by her left. So that's our.
I saw that. I did see that.
Yeah. So that's just to so then kind of two other things we want to say. So we also just want to clear up our intentions here, and in fact, maybe I'll just let Avi speak to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So couple things. My two main intentions that I have. So to hopefully get to a conclusion about this topic, um, regardless of whatever that may be, my goal is to seek the truth. And if there is something true, and something that I think is worthy of pursuing, to get others to pursue it. But also, if there is something that um, can potentially strengthen the trans community, I want that to be available as well, and that includes things such as defenses, particularly if there are any chinks in the armor. And this topic is a topic that I sort of see as a chink in the armor, and I want to not have that um, chink exposed to those who would like to attack trans people. Um, and that is something I have seen. And so my intention here is that's really, those are my two intentions in coming here.
Yeah, and
And what about you, Isaac? Yeah, no, I was just asking you about your intentions, Isaac.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say effectively the same thing. I mean, it's hard to account for intentions. We know that from psychology, but I'd say the same kind of thing. Like, I just like to go after the truth. And in this case, I think there's also an interest of like, we're both very much like pro-trans, and not in the way where we say that, then 10 minutes into the conversation you discover we hold insane political descriptions. But like, I think you're gonna probably find if you talk about our politics around the topics at all, which I hope we don't have to because it's kind of off topic, but I think you would find if we had that conversation that we don't have politics that are like at all like out there or crazy about trans stuff. So yeah, and then the final thing we wanted to clear up before getting into this is just kind of where we're at with that whole debate, because I don't like the thought of the conversation we're about to have now being like kind of continuation of that, or having that kind of like hanging in the air. So yeah, well, okay, yeah, obviously, I hope it doesn't turn into us, screaming at each other. But
yeah, I should hope not, yeah.
So I guess what we want to say is like, I don't think either of us are even really taking the time to think through much of that. We have zero interest in the drama. We don't even have interest actually in a lot of the topics that were covered there. It's just there's this one particular interest in. Now,
wait, you mean you didn't care about Godzilla versus King Kong?
Can't say I did. So sorry, I hope that's not offensive. But
now, some people in my audience might take offense to that, but
right, well,
not me for sure.
Lost a few of them, but okay. So I guess I just wanted to say that. So it is the case that we agree with what Riley was saying, right? Like, this view came actually from Avi who made Riley aware of it. So we agree with what she's saying, but we also want to say one or two things, right? So the first is that we don't think that Riley did a great job of articulating. So I think it's completely understandable that like a smart person with their head on straight could have that conversation with her and not come out convinced of the position. So that's one thing.
Well, I'm glad that you agree with that, or that you disagree with her conclusion on that part, because that was not the takeaway.
Well, it's
but
not,
yes, I'm glad to hear that we can at least come to a fair approach, a good faith approach to this conversation. Because I think it's kind of fair.
I just want to make sure we're saying the same thing with we agree with her conclusion on the topic, but if you mean her conclusion that she communicated it in a way that's perfectly intelligible,
well, that no reasonable person could disagree.
Yeah, I think if the case is made clearly, I think that's probably true, but I don't think Riley made it that clear. I also do want to say though, so that's kind of that's sort of us saying we're understanding of your perspective, right? We get why you would come out of there not persuaded, right? She didn't do the best job explaining it, but I also want to be fair to Riley and say it's a complicated thing, and it's easy to understand something well enough in your head that you're convinced of it. Then when you go to talk about it, realize, okay, this is actually pretty complicated to talk about. So I'm not really like holding her at fault for not communicating it.
Sure.
But okay, so we don't want to spend any more time talking about people here, but we just wanted to kind of clear the air around all that before getting into the topic.
Okay. Yeah. So there seems to be in the following weeks there's been like obviously a lot of talk about this. There seems to be a lot of differing opinions. I guess the best way to begin this is to sort of state what I believe and why I believe it. And for the record, not like I am not like credentialed philosopher or anything like that. Though I've done my fair share of reading in time, and I like to believe that I have a reasonably good, or at least a reasonable amount grasp on most of these topics. My belief is I do not agree with the assertion that the idea that a woman is someone who identifies as a woman is a infinite regress. I don't think that that is an accurate portrayal, and there's a number of reasons for that. But I also believe that even if it were some sort of mathematical infinite regress, that it would not affect the politics of that statement nearly at all. And the reason for that is that, I mean, gender and identity in and of themselves are two of the most complex and ephemeral topics that a human can undertake at all. There is no consensus in almost any way except for various observations about like the phenomena. For example, we acknowledge there is a consensus in the acknowledgement that gender is non-binary because we have evidence of that existing. But as far as what gender is, distilling that down to a specific definition has proven very difficult. And there it doesn't seem to be any specific consensus on that. So as a result, I believe that on a functional level, but also I believe that it will also hold up in a philosophical level, that we can, for all intents and purposes, assume that in most, if not all cases, someone is who they say that they are when it comes to identifying traits. Now, some people would equate this and have equated this to saying that someone can claim to be an object or something like that. I don't believe that's the case. I believe that's because we treat identifiers like matters or perhaps my language is off here a little bit, but subjects of personal identity very, very differently than we do a definable object like a can of soda or something along those lines. And uh, because of that, we have ways in which we can reasonably and ethically say that someone is not the president of the United States or is not an attack helicopter, as the meme goes. But it is much harder for us to say that someone is not the gender that they claim they are. And as a result of that, we should, in general, or as a rule, take people at good faith and accept the gender that they claim to be, because gender is, for all intents and purposes, something that you can claim. So that's my general position, and we can go and clarify that further and inquire on it and cross-examine and whatever you'd like.
Yeah, well, okay. Avi, do you want to sort of start off, or do you want me to?
I'll start off at the second point,
Mhm.
because I think this is really important that it's made. So the point of taking people at who they say that they are,
Mhm.
completely agreed.
Right.
And nothing about this conversation, Demon Mama, is going to hinge on that. Um, although I may have a different view of gender than you.
Oof.
Sorry, my dogs are
Whoa.
just barking. Sorry.
Holy shit. Scared the shit out of me.
Sorry,
It's all
that
good,
happens
though.
sometimes.
Peppers.
You know what, Isaac may okay. All right. Okay. All right. So just to finish that point, although I may have a different view of gender than you do, um, the the way I view gender also has a lot to do with internal characteristics such as mental traits, and those are only things that can be, um, although not all mental traits are exhausted by identity. Um, there are other traits that I have in mind when I talk of gender that are mental. And because of that, the best person who has access to those traits are individuals who are saying that they are who they are, and not an individual who does not have access to their mind.
Of course.
And so, yeah. And so, whether or not gender is um, all about, whether gender is self identification or not, it doesn't hinge on whether we would say someone is who they say they are or not. Like, regardless of what view we take there, it's not going to hinge, and nothing will turn on us saying things like, "Oh, well, now you're not who you say you are," because it's not all about self ID. Like, that's completely not the view either of us would take.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
We both think self ID is an important aspect of gender, and additionally, the kind of critique you're mentioning, I think I've heard Rem and Destiny kind of talk about that, and I do think that kind of critique will work under certain circumstances, but that's different than the kind of thing we're talking about. So we don't need to go way into what that critique. Let's make it clear how it's a bit different. I think that critique is supposed to go something like, if a term is defined in terms of other things, right? So you have like president, like defined in terms of like like being the person who runs the country and all this, right?
Well, we have like a massive document of things that qualify someone to be the president.
Right.
But yes,
I was just like giving a very
in general, yeah,
extremely loose idea, right? A rock is like
that's
that
fair.
kind of hard thing. There's more to it than that. There's like molecular structure, or whatever. But the point is, if you have something that's defined in terms of other things, then it looks funny to say that if someone just claims to identify as that thing, then they are that thing, right? But that's a completely different kind of critique, and that's actually, I don't even think there's an overlap in the situations where that and our critique work, because we're talking about instances where gender isn't defined in terms of other things. We're talking about where you get kind of a recursive definition. But okay, let's not overcomplicate things. Let's just get right into the kind of the
Sure,
substance of this. So
sure.
this is the issue, okay? If the idea is that if ascertaining the meaning of a term requires completing a non-completing process, then that term doesn't have meaning. And if woman is defined as one who identifies as woman,
Hmm.
ascertaining the meaning of the term will require completing a non-completing process. So we just kind of like first order ponens our way to the answer, that therefore woman defined as such is
I'm
that's the
not
critique.
sure that that's true though. Is it not true that and forgive me again, this is
Yeah.
not my area of expertise, but in preparation for this, I've done some, thinking and also some research. Is it not true that um hold on a second. Let me actually wrote this down because I wanted to be able
Sure.
to acknowledge this and see if how we can tackle this. So uh if we have the definition set as, more formally, a person X is a woman if and only if X identifies as a woman. In like modern predicate logic, this would be translated at the term that I have here written down. And again, this is not like my original research. I'm not a philosopher, but this is where I was operating off of, and you can tell me what you think about this. But woman would be translated as the predicate is a woman, and as we can see, this is not the same as identifies as a woman. So it's not a direct substitution. We have they're not it's not a loop that is directly subbing this. It is pointing out that that we allow, like, woman is a thing you can identify as, and a woman as the, you know, as the topic that we're talking about is someone who chooses that identity. Is that not accurate?
Well, it seems to me like this is the problem. You say a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. Then
Hmm.
when you ask about the definition, right? When you have a definition, you have a definiendum, which is a term to be defined, and you have the definiend,
Hmm.
where you provide the meaning of the term. The definiens contains the definiendum, right? So we're left saying someone who identifies as a, and then there's the very term that we're trying to define, and that's where the regression begins, right? You get someone who
Well, that's
identifies as someone who identifies as someone who identifies, and it'll
Uh, I mean, but that isn't necessarily true, right? Because English is being a natural language and not a formal language. Uh, it you can't like map that directly. Like the idea of identifying as a woman, just because the word is contained in there in this particular definition, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to like infinitely recurse. Because if like here, let me read you this for something that I typed up, and you can tell me what you think about this. This was my sort of lay off the cuff before any research, and then sort of updated as I've done more research definition of how I envision gender as a concept, and what or how I think and how I think we should have gender as a concept, which is that gender in and of itself is a factor of identity. Identity is how we obviously distinguish ourselves from others and the world. Identity is heavily reliant on context and history. It's not simply physical factors, though physical factors can obviously sometimes become a part of identity.
Can I cut you off,
Um,
Demon Mama?
yeah, absolutely.
The second you go down that road, you're going to get in territory that we're fine with. We're talking about a definition that is simply one who identifies as a woman. The second you start saying that there are other factors that we can incorporate in the definition, we're going to start getting out of that kind of territory. Start saying, oh, it's about having
Well,
these kind of mental states or these kind of physical characteristics, anything like that. Then we're not. Then we're defining it in terms of something else, not defining it in terms of itself.
right. But if woman is an identifier, and we can obviously agree that people can use identifiers, then a woman being someone who declares they are a woman would be the same thing as saying John is a person who says they are John, right?
When we say that a woman is someone who, well, I don't think so. I think that's because John has. We could define John in terms of other things. You're not just defining the term.
Can you?
Yeah,
How do
I
you
think.
define a name?
Well, I think you'd be like John is like this physical body composed of molecules in Alabama, right? Like other um
Well,
properties.
no, I
But
don't think so. Like John
okay,
is a name, an identifier that is taken by a person who may have those physical traits. But John, there are many people named John.
wait,
And right?
sorry, you can, yeah.
So John is a name that can be taken by essentially anybody. And much like other identifiers, there are all kinds of identifiers that can be claimed by people, and some of these, again, like president, we have mutually agreed upon qualifiers, like you need to go through the electoral process, blah blah blah, which also, without getting into politics, we know that breaks down sometimes too. However, with identifiers, you can't really challenge somebody on whether their name is John or not, because being being like having the name John is defined as somebody who has the name John. And we use that definition all the time because John, in and of itself, is an identifier. And so, in defining that identifier, we can say, well, anybody can be John. It's a name that anybody can take because it is an identifier. So, anybody who takes the name John can be John. And that isn't an infinite regress. It is simply I mean, I guess you could say it's like self-referential, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is interminable.
Um,
So
well, the difference is, yeah, there's just a slight equivocation between senses, right? The second is
right,
second
exactly. Yeah,
going, yeah.
yeah.
The
It's the
second,
use mentioned. This is use mentioned distinction,
yeah,
unless you
but
see that.
there's a few bad actors who are pushing this point also. So I'm wondering. I don't think you're a bad actor, but I'm wondering if
I
they've
hope
like
not.
tried to. Well, no, I have no reason. I wonder if they dug their roots in. But yeah, that answer, that's actually an equivocation between senses of, right. The one is just a label. The other is this term defined in a particular. We're not actually not using
Well, but isn't
case.
that a normal thing that we do in like constantly in language?
Yeah, but that's why that's not problematic, right? But if you don't equivocate, don't use the same word but in two different senses, then you'll get the regression problem. If you say John is one who identifies as John, second use of the term John there isn't simply referring to label, right? It's referring to the term that we're defining in the first place. You get the regression the same way.
So the name John is like a
there's
name.
also
Like
instead of
it's an identifier,
if
and then
if you want to push back on that, you can, but there's also an easier way to take you to like seeing the kind of like getting at here.
okay, sure, sure.
Like if I ask you define woman, what would
Hmm.
presumably you'd say one who identifies as woman. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's perhaps better ways to word it. Like I would say, like a woman is a gender signify is like a word that represents a gender identity. A gender identity is a part of
Mm,
the sort of thing that I rattled off before. But I
but
don't
Demon,
think that. Yeah.
we're adding different layers. Our critique specifically is of the
Right.
definition of woman, that is one who identifies as woman, or there's no indication on what's meant by woman.
Well, I mean, wouldn't that be contextual then? Like,
I'm
wouldn't that
not sure,
like
but
it seems like what you're trying to define as a single uh like use purpose of this sentence when in reality this sentence exists in context,
if
right?
you're using the
Or am
words,
I misunderstanding what you're saying?
well, I'm not sure, but I can clarify what it is I'm saying. If I
Sure,
ask
sure.
you what you mean by woman, you say one
Uh-huh.
who identifies as woman, right?
Yes.
Then you've defined the term in terms of the very word I don't understand the meaning of. If I say, what does it mean for one to identify as a woman? I don't know what woman means. Say, well,
What
woman
does it
is one
mean
who
for one to identify as a woman?
what is
The
the
same thing as it does
word?
for someone to identify as John.
Wait, no, I'm saying when you define woman, one who identifies as a woman, it,
Right.
if the person you're speaking to is trying to understand the meaning of woman,
Mhm.
but when you describe the meaning of woman, the very term they don't understand the definition of shows up in the definition. You understand that
Right, but
that
contextually, they understand what that is. Because if you say anybody, if you are in the conversation, anybody can identify as a woman, which is the what is actually being said by that statement, then people will go, anybody who identifies as a woman is a woman. Okay, I recognize what this is. Somebody who says I'm a woman or believes they're a woman, you could change the wording around a little bit. Obviously, when I say, I don't literally mean like you have to go and stand on a street corner and declare that. But anybody who claims to be a woman is a woman. There you have it. That's all the meaning that I believe that there is in woman. I don't really think there's much more to most of the terms for gender that we use. I don't believe that.
well, here,
Um,
let's try this dialectic then. I can't
sure.
understand. So if I
Oh,
say,
that's fine.
what's the definition? What's it mean?
Hmm.
Presumably, maybe we can skip a stage. The first step is you say it's as a woman.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, so then if I respond by saying the very term that I don't understand the meaning of just showed up in the definition, I'm still not understanding what it means to be a woman, right? What's the response to that?
Well, it, I'm sorry. I guess I'm struggling to understand like what's the issue. To be a woman is to take upon yourself the identifier of woman. That's all that it means. And yes, I will agree that like the term woman is a not very helpful term, but that's part of the problem, right? That's part of the
Dean,
greater
Mama,
discussion on gender.
sorry, I'm so sorry. Can I ask you a question? When you say to be a woman, it's to take upon the identifier as a woman.
Yeah.
In the first instance of woman, are you referring to that instance of woman as an identifier, or are you referring to that instance of woman as something other than an identifier? And the
Well,
latter
wouldn't that be the
instance of woman.
definition? And then the definition is defined by the identifier?
Well, I'm just asking if because the issue
Because
is
this
the
is an
word woman.
imperfection of language in general, right? Because like and maybe I'm wrong here, and maybe you can tell me why I'm wrong here, but uh like a color is a thing that's rather hard to define. And colloquially, well, something is that is red is something that we identify as red. And now
Well, Dima,
that
what
is
I'm
an
getting.
external one that you can check with other things, but it is a similar term, whereas one that it is a concept that can only exist contextually.
So, Dima,
So
what
the
I'm getting
assumption
at.
is that somebody would understand how language works. Obviously, in order to be able to speak, we have to understand language.
Sure. So what I'm getting at in language is something known as the use mention distinction.
Okay.
Okay. So, for example, we can use the John example.
Mhm.
So when we in language there's something known as the use mention distinction. So the use of the word John
Mhm.
would refer to this person John or the people that are John. Um, the mention aspect of the word John would be something like this. John has 4 letters,
Mhm.
John.
Yeah.
There's a the use of the word John and the mention of the word John mean 2 different things. If anyone wants to look up the use mention distinction, they could look into that. But the
Well,
point
isn't
here
that
is
like inherent to any definition though?
No. Well, it's
Well,
inherent to
because
word.
like
It's inherent to word. Wait, hold on. Let me just rephrase. So,
sure.
the use mention distinction can happen to just about every word. But the point that we're trying to make is that the reason this is coming up is because when we say there is a regress when you use the same word um, when the same word is showing up in the definitions as the definiendum. The response to that you seem to be bringing is saying, okay, well, we use these things all the time. With John is anyone who identifies as a John, like a Packers fan is anyone who identifies as a Packers fan.
Right.
Um, so the issue with that is that in John, if the word John in the first sense that it's coming up in is meaning anything different than the second sense it's coming up in, then we're not actually then we're equivocating. We're not actually talking about the type of definition that we're talking about anymore. So if you have label defined in terms of a label, or if you have person defined in terms of a person, so if use defined in terms of a use, or mention defined in terms of a mention, then that's an infinite regress. If you have use defined in terms of a mention, that's not an infinite regress, because although it is an equivocation, but it wouldn't be an infinite regress because the um, the definiens doesn't contain the definiendum.
Hmm.
I
Does that make
also, I
sense?
also,
Okay.
I also think that like we can go down roads like this. I feel like we don't need to hit that level of complexity. I think that Demon Mama might see the problem if we just do the. Okay, don't you think it'd be smart here to just try to do the try to make us understand what it means while defining it regressively, right? Like if I say what is meant by woman, what does that mean? You say one who identifies as woman, and
Mhm.
I respond by saying, well, the very term I don't understand the meaning of showed up in the definition there.
Yeah, but
Still,
it did in a but as you have highlighted, it did as a but as necessitates by a definition, it does in a different context, right? Because any word, like if you were to say what is woman, well, it's a 5-letter word, is one way of defining woman, as you've pointed out. If we're trying to talk about the literal word woman, if we're talking about the concept of woman, well, the concept of woman is defined by anybody who identifies as a woman. So the act, woman is being defined by the act of someone taking on that label, much like any other label. Well, not necessarily every label, but like many labels. So I don't agree with the idea that this is like that like because the same word is in there. I mean, I feel like this is sort of a limitation of language in general. But a definition of this level where all that you're talking about and what I believe to be true and I believe to be both functional. I think we agree on the like functional outcome of all of this. Um yeah,
Okay, so if
do you see where
yeah,
I'm coming from?
yeah, I think so. If you're so just so to be completely clear, if you say a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, and if in the first instance of woman, that first time you mention woman,
Mhm.
you mean the use, so you mean the people who are women, and the second time you refer to the word woman in the definiendum definiens pair, woman is anyone who identifies as woman. That second time you use that word, you are referring to the mention, which is anyone who takes up the label, or the label of the word woman. Um, that wouldn't lead to an infinite regress. That's not
I agree.
regressive. But it's also not. I mean, there are other. Don't get me wrong. There are
It's
other.
very useful in my opinion, but yeah.
Well, I mean, there are other. I mean, in my view, there would be other issues and problems with that, with that type of definition. But what we want to, but before we get into that, um, what I want to clarify is the reason that doesn't, the only reason that doesn't lead to an infinite regress is because we're equivocating on what the on the two words. The two words are being used in different senses.
Right? Can I ask something here? Demon
Well,
Mama,
right.
Yeah,
I
sure.
think that's the only way.
I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna ask you one. You understand that were there not an equivocation, would have an infinite regress, or that also?
Well, I think, I mean, I'm not entirely clear on how that would function, because I don't like, to me, like, I guess this is a very complicated topic, and so I'm trying to make sure that I'm like understanding exactly what's said. But to me, like, the idea of an infinite, like, is there another example that you could give that's like a parallel to show how, to illustrate how this would be like a problematic like infinite regress? Because that's not what I've understood. Like I get in mathematics where if you say x equals x plus y, that you can have it, that then you plug in x plus y for x, and then you have to plug in x plus y for x plus y. I understand that, but we're not talking about mathematics. We're talking about
So that actually was a
language.
bad
We actually
example.
think that
But yeah.
the math example actually Riley made an error on.
Oh, okay. I mean, then I'm trying to understand like where the regress occurs.
There's one thing we need to clear up, because
Yeah.
there's two different notions of this definition. There's
Okay.
one, it's not regressive. Different sense in opinion. So
Well,
we're not
isn't that, now maybe I'm wrong here. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. Isn't that like always the case with almost every definition? Because
no,
um
if you,
No.
most words, if you look up, they definition go up in the
In fact,
well,
that's intentional in lexicographic definitions. They try their best. Dictionaries try their best to not have the definiendum
like if
show up in the definitions.
yeah, like if you look up couch, your couch
huh,
won't be in the definition of couch.
correct. But also couch is an object and not an identifier. Are there any identifiers that you can even think of? Like this is part of the thing. Like, I think that gender is one of those things that is uh it is so intrinsic and I don't even know if I want to say intrinsic. It is so personal and and unique to human consciousness that it doesn't really, it's very difficult to come up with a meaningful definition that doesn't essentially say, well, woman is, at the end of the day, a label.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
So there are
for the
we
record,
can give examples of
really,
identifiers. Sure.
and
Whoa.
we really disagree with that. Also, we think there's very clear way to define. I mean, it's
Okay.
a fun.
Well, I mean, maybe that would be a good idea to start with, is like give your definition, and we can sort of compare and contrast and see if I can figure out the differences as to why you believe that definition to be better, etc.
Okay, well, we're happy to go there, but I feel like I want to disambiguate something. There's like two
Okay.
senses of this definition that we're kind of talking about here. I want it to be clear where our critique applies. So
Okay.
in the case, and just to be clear, my last response was just to asked if all definitions work where they definiendum shows up in the definiens. I don't think that'll be the case with things you can identify.
Even in identifiers,
like
yeah.
if you look up
Like if you look up race, like the definition of like race, you won't, even in just about every dictionary you'll look at, the race won't if the definiendum is race, the definiens almost always will not have the word race in it.
Well,
and
yes, but also race is a very, very different topic, and also has a very different historical context and linguistic history.
We can go to other identifiers. I mean, look, it's
wait, but that was a
Yeah.
further point. All we were responding to, first, the point that all definitions are like this, and then second, the case that all definitions of identifiers are. But I just wanted to disambiguate these.
Okay, I mean, I just don't know if that's necessarily true. I don't know if that would hold up for something like names, which I do think is something that's like you know, or a fan, or the fan example. I don't think that those would be able, but would be very, those are like contextually relevant terms. These are terms that are inherently contextual, because it is very hard to describe someone as like a fan of something without either becoming exclusionary or acknowledging that there is a linguistic limitation where we have to come up with something like like an identifier, which could be you know, in and of itself very hollow if it was taken in a vacuum, but because of contextual clues and historical clues becomes relevant again.
So,
Does that make sense?
well, what I'm getting a bit stuck on is, so we have like a kind of an argument, like premises,
Uh-huh.
and I think that right now I want to disambiguate these two senses of definition. Our critique is actually not about one of them. I think there might be a misunderstanding,
Sure.
our fault or your, about
Or no
this,
one's.
this. Yes, that's possible. Sure. Okay. Fair enough. About the scope of our criticism. So if we
Mhm.
take these two kinds of definitions, right? If there's one where there's an equivocation sense, so they both have the same form, right? Woman is someone who identifies as woman.
Mhm.
In the case that there's equivocation on the meaning of woman, definient, our critique is not talking about that. We're only talking about the not equivocation.
Okay.
And then to kind of press the point, like again, the structure of the argument is going to be roughly, the first premise would be something like, if ascertaining the meaning of a term requires completing a non-complete process, then that term has no meaning. Woman defined as one who identifies as woman, brackets here, without equivocation. To ascertain the meaning, that definition requires completing a non-completing process, and then the conclusion get to logic via like a kind of inference. It's going to be that definition of woman has no meaning. So I just want to be clear, we're not talking about instance where there's equivocation. In the instance where there isn't, I'm hoping that you can appreciate what the problem is, right? Like, say that someone, when they use the word woman in the definiend, right? The definiendum is
Uh-huh.
the term to be, this is just helpful language for the discussion. The definiendum is
Sure.
that we're defining, the definiend
Mhm.
part that appears after, like sometimes we'll just call the definiend definition. Yeah, so in the case where there's not equivocation, woman means the same
Just
thing.
for the Isaac, the definiendum is the term that we're seeking to define, right?
Right.
That's what you said? I may have just misheard. Definiendum is the term we're seeking to define.
No, no,
Definiens.
no, yeah, you're right. The definiendum is the, yeah, right, and then definiend, how we're defining it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Did I say that
It's comes.
backwards?
I maybe have misheard.
Well, I may
But
have
in
spoken,
any
or it might be no one's fault.
or it might be no one's fault. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. But
so
anyway, in any case, yeah, definiendum is the term, and then that's what's before the
definition sign.
colon.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a forward definition sign, and then after the definition sign is the definiens.
So,
The
so
that's what gives meaning to the word.
right. So in this case where we're talking about the same definition as given, but when woman shows up in definiens, it does have the same add in definiendum. Do you agree that under conditions it creates a regress, or do you find that still
I think I understand what you're trying to claim, but I don't know. Like this is one where I don't actually know, and I don't think I know. I don't know if I know enough about linguistics to be sure of that claim. Because as far as I understand it, right in languages like English, like uh syntax and word order and these sort of things are really fucking important, right? So like someone who identifies as a woman is a uh different grammatical structure by the very definition we're using as than just the standalone term woman, right? Because I think that a child would be able to understand if a child was say someone who like barely knew the language. Well, what's a woman? Well, anybody who says they're a woman. I think they would understand all of that. That would make sense to them in the sense that it is the act of identifying that is the only way that with identifiers, the only way that we learn the truth of an identifier is by, claiming that identifier for ourselves. And
but
therefore, though it is literally like though the like woman a five-letter word and woman a five-letter word appear here, there is by its nature, because of the way that English works, because of the way our language is structured, there is a there isn't that at least I don't believe there's really any other way for it to be seen except for um like syntactically being a slightly separate structure. So I do understand what you're getting at, that like if you directly substitute words for definitions, and if you were to take the word woman and erase it out of that sentence and then reinsert the definition, that you would
Yes,
end up with a mess.
exactly.
But
Right.
that's not how language works. That's not how English works. That's not how any like that's not how these languages work, and that's very well recognized. That's a like a common like commonly understood. There is consensus on that among linguists, as I understand, that like we that because English is a language that has because, well, first of all, because languages are inherently contextual, that is like almost impossible to avoid. There is a syntactic difference in the definition that is relevant here and that creates meaning. So unlike saying like a bird is a bird, bird equals a bird, which would be, I agree, would be useless. People could not figure out what that
In a
meant.
different way,
A
though, it's got to be said that that's a tautology, and that's slightly different.
I- right. But and I realized in the original like conversation I had a bit of a mix up in my philosophical terms, but I hope that
Fine.
we can move past that.
Yeah, no worries.
But in this particular case, like being that we are talking of we are trying to define something that is a matter of identity, there is a difference between the standalone woman word and identifying as a woman. And that can be understood, and that is understood and recognized linguistically as a, perhaps you could say this is a flaw of English, that we have to sometimes do things like this. I would say often in edge cases, like for example, with something highly nuanced like gender. But I don't necessarily agree that I still don't really see that there is that like woman and identify as a woman, those are grammatically, linguistically different structures. And therefore, I don't see how there could be I understand where it could be interpreted in some ways as a sort of a regress, but I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that that's the case with the with the structure of it. I think it's
So
possible for it to be interpreted that way, but I don't think that's the only interpretation. And I think that with the understanding of syntax and the structure of language in English, that it is clear that that is not the case. Right?
okay, well, so no, I don't think.
Hmm.
I think that someone can press you by saying, "Well, what's the definition?" The one who
Mhm.
identifies as a woman, they respond by saying, "I don't understand what you mean because the term I'm up in the definition."
Oh,
How
well, I
how
mean,
can I just say something?
sure,
How
sure.
do you, without adding more information, reply in a way that clarifies the meaning? Right? If you reply by saying, "Well, when the term shows up in the definitions, it just means the same thing," right? Because then they're just gonna ask a further time. Okay, well, then when it shows up in the definitions of the term woman that showed up in the definition of the term woman, what does it mean there, right? And you clarify the same thing again. Well, it means the same thing that it always means, right? And then that can repeat out. So if someone kind of presses you to actually provide meaning of the term without adding information, spiraling down the regress, how would you do that?
Well, I mean, there's different ways of restating it, that it could perhaps provide clarity to somebody who didn't understand that. But again, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I've never encountered this type of problem. Like, that's the strange thing until now. I mean, I will say that, like, I think that perhaps some people who, and I don't know, like, I've never encountered this like functionally. So I don't know. I think that there are plenty of examples of contextual information that's used in language. But you could also say woman is a gender. And then people will go, oh, well, what's a gender? And then you go, well, a gender is something that you declare about yourself that has these other things. But I
That
also
has right, but just sorry to cut in,
set
but
things.
just please cut in on me also if I'm ever saying anything that you feel speed the conversation up by cutting in.
Sure.
Second, you add those things, we're adding information. Right? So we're talking about slightly different.
Well, right, but but I mean, again, limitation of language, right? A woman being somebody who identifies as a woman, there is the assumption that people understand that identifying as a woman is an action, right?
But
Like, I agree that like if you take this and you remove all context, all assumptions of understanding of the words, that you could have this situation of an infinite regress. But in the just basic function of language, we assume that the person that we're talking to understands what identifying as means and goes, ah, I
Yeah,
see.
but Demon Mom, I think we do. I think the identifies as part clear enough to us what identifying is, but it's the
Mhm.
fact that they're identifying as the very term that we don't understand the meaning.
Well,
Right. So this
well,
is like
yeah, but
the issue of circular definitions. So
right,
it,
but how else do you define a I mean, I guess that's the thing.
Maybe
Then
we should. Do you want?
then
Well,
how
wait,
is it
because okay, maybe a bit of what's happening here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just realizing maybe there's like a human element going on here. If there's not some clear definition provided to you that's still going to do all the work definition term is doing for you, you're going to be more inclined to stick to your current definition. Why don't we clarify roughly just as few? Why don't we clarify roughly what we're talking about, and maybe we'll come back around.
I mean, that could be great. I would love to see like other examples. The only reason why like I I first of all, like again, I've made my opinion sort of clear as to why I don't believe it's a good example of an infinite regress. But also on a functional level, like I've had no issues until now with using this definition, and I hear it used frequently.
Yeah, I
can
Yeah,
I just say? Wait,
yeah,
no, I don't, because I don't grant that functionally. It hasn't. Well, I mean, I grant that functionally you haven't seen it. I just want to
sure,
mention that functionally I have seen this objection.
okay.
Um,
and
uh,
we also need to point out it's a liability. It's like just because we haven't latched onto it doesn't mean we won't. It's sitting there.
yeah, yeah. So I just want to step up and say I actually have seen this very objection be brought by a transphobe who is going to debate a trans person.
Okay.
Now
Do you
that
think
was all.
oh,
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
No, 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 please go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
Sorry.
So now, fortunately, I knew of this objection ahead of time, and that was prevented because I reached out to the trans person and made them aware of it, and they were able to shut it down in the debate really quickly, and they just completely destroyed the transphobe in the debate. Um,
Damn.
but
Did everybody clap?
it's
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
yeah. So um, no, it was a really good debate actually. Well, it was a terrible debate, but for the transphobe. But anyway, um, the point is like yes, I have seen it in practice, and it's good that I think we're at the cutting edge of realizing it before they do. In other words, like that's the good thing about this is that I don't want this to be an issue where people who are trans and part of the trans community and allies feel the need to dig the heels to maintain this view in the face of others if they actually have a legitimate criticism, especially if those others are transphobes. So, yeah,
Or
go ahead.
And like rhetorical efficacy, no reason to think that's static, right? Like there might be certain static elements
sure.
to do what like tends to affect human psychology well, but there's also all the contextual factors of what's happening in the range of things that are going to play into what is effective. So we don't
Right.
want to make
It's a highly
assumption
subjective thing. Yeah.
yeah, people's subjectivity absolutely. So
Yeah.
you don't want to make the assumption that because right now at this particular point, the rhetoric we're effective will continue into given that there's a problem with side can latch on to. But I just want to draw a bit of tension to like let's not be too quick to infer from not having many problems so far that we won't have many. With respect to the actual point though, yeah. So like this is the thing. If
Sure.
if I mean I know I've said it a few times, but it's just like if we ask you for the definition, then you say one who identifies as woman. Then I respond by saying I'm still just not clear what you're saying because the definition contains the word I don't understand the meaning of. Right? You can then reply by saying, well, we all understand what identifying means. I can say, yeah, and I understand that part of the sentence, but not the other part. Still trying to understand.
Right, because the key problem with the circular definition is that it assumes prior understanding of the word that's trying to be defined in the first place. The problem is not that it's assuming the other parts of the sentence. The problem is circular definitions assume prior understanding of the very term that the definition seeks to define.
I
That's what makes the circular definition
don't know
regressive.
about that. I don't know about that. See, that's where I disagree because I mean, I don't know. Like again, and perhaps this is I don't know. Maybe this is a political difference, and I'm not understanding where that comes in. I'm not 100% sure. But in my uh in a functional and working definition of woman, I don't believe that there should be any intrinsic or essential value to the term woman outside of it being an identifier. I think it should be an identifier. I don't think it's sensical to define it as anything else.
I thought of a good way to convey. Okay,
Sure.
I
I
think
would love to hear that.
you asked about analogies. Maybe we can
Uh-huh.
give like an analogy. So if I say something like Flarbalgark,
Okay.
one who identifies as Flarbalgark.
Yeah.
Now, do you actually have any idea what I mean when I say Flarbalgark?
Yeah. I would follow up if I was a child learning that language or even just a person learning that language. I would say, "Are you a Farblegark?" And they would go, "No." And I would go, "Okay." And then I would ask somebody else, "Are you a Farblegark?" And they would go, "Yes." And I would go, "Okay, I get this now."
But that's you seeking further like. But if I just tell you Farblegark is defined as who identifies as Farblegark, you
Yeah.
actually tell the term Farblegark there.
But there isn't a meaning outside of it being an identifier. That's the point. That's the entire point of the word. The point, the
No, no,
idea that
no,
we
no.
don't need label.
It has a meaning. The meaning is one who identifies as Farblegark.
Well, yes, of course, but that identifier, that is all that that term does. What it sounds like, I don't know, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but what it feels like is like there is a desire to have more to the meaning than it being a label or an identifier that's functionally arbitrary, which I believe gender to be. I
Isaac,
believe
I
that
think one thing clearing things up, I think what's happening here is I think Demon Mama is taking your Farblegark example and doing the use mention equivocation. So what might be helpful clearing it up is when you say Farblegark is one who identifies as a Farblegark, we're clarifying that in both uses of that term Farblegark, they are both either the use term or they are both either the mention term. We're not doing a use in one sense and a mention in another instance of the word. So we don't want to go back into the type of definition where the equivocation is taking place.
well, then wouldn't that be a matter of the question being asked then as to which one of those you would conclude? Like
Well, we're
because
just
in the case of identifiers, I don't see how you would resolve. Like I struggle to see how you would resolve it any other way.
well, all we're saying here is that if it is the case, if the type of definition we're referring to is where both the term being defined and both uses of the same word that appear both in the definiendum and the definiens are in the same sense. Like if they're both identifier or if they're both the individual, then that would result in an infinite regress. Now, if you're going to say they mean two different things, then that doesn't result in infinite
Well,
regress. But
again, I
that's
don't think it's the word necessarily that means two different things. I don't know that that's like I don't know that that maps to language in the way that it's being worded. What I'm saying is that like identifying as a woman is in and of itself a concept that can be understood. Or identifying as X, you can insert whatever there as an identifier. Any identifier. You could say this for man as well, or non-binary. All of those words could be subbed into an equivalent definition of this because the identify as is the key part of that definition.
well, let's just before we get into it, let's just clarify just that there's a common understanding of the two different definitions that we're talking about. So, like if I say um, an X is anyone who identifies as an X. Now, there could be one of several types of definitions we're talking about. We can say um, an X use is anyone who identifies as an X use. That's the use sense of the term.
Okay.
An X mention is anyone who identifies as an X mention. So so now we're using the mention case in both. There's an X use is anyone who identifies as an X mention, And there's an X mention is anyone who identifies as an X use, right? So there's 4 possible things with the use mention distinction. There's 4 possible definitions we're talking about. Now, our critique applies only to the first 2, because in the first 2 definitions, it's both use and mention in the same sense. Our critique the infinite regress critique would not apply to X use is anyone who identifies as an X mention. And it would not apply to X mention is anyone who identifies as an X use. It would only apply to X use is anyone who identifies as X use, and X mention is anyone who identifies as X mention. Does that make sense?
I find it a little bit difficult to follow exactly what you mean because I'm trying to understand, like in this case, how you would structure the use version of this or the mention. Like I
I
don't
can
know
answer
the
that.
distinction. I mean, I can understand with other terms, like for example,
Eamon, you actually
like
had. Can I just cut? I'm sorry to cut you off, but you had actually done it perfectly. We're talking
okay,
structured. Uh, I don't know about the use language there, but you had structured a definition, or an instance that had the kind of problem we were talking about. You said,
okay,
I understand. Said something roughly like, I understand if it means the same thing in context, then you can sub one expand
okay.
out, right? We're talking about where the meaning is identical. I'm the word. So I don't even.
Hmm.
I wonder if it's even worth getting into use and mention. All we need to talk about is the meaning identity. I mean, then we don't have to bring in that extra terminology and quibble of, because what we're talking about applies in the case where definition term is being
Hmm.
like this is. I mean, I guess I don't know
Yeah,
how
I
to
just
get down any deeper than this, but
it
it's just
it's
like if
definitely difficult. Yeah.
well, this is the thing. That's a lot of syllables. Care if I just abbreviate to D?
Yeah, sure. It's fine. Most
You
people
also
do
This is
DM or
coming
DMM.
from this is
DM or
coming from
DMM.
people who are saying definiendum and definitions and
yeah,
everybody. Yeah,
okay,
sure.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you
So
can just you could say DM, DMM, mama, whatever. I don't care.
perfect. Okay, so yeah. This is the problem though. Like the problem is really you have to picture a person who doesn't have an understanding of what the term. Then
Mhm,
when you tell them what the term means, the very
mhm,
term they don't understand the meaning definition. They try to understand that definition by asking about a word that's stopping them from ascertaining the meaning of the definition. Then they're given another definition that contains the word that they don't understand the meaning. That's
right,
where
but
you're going to get the
that
problem.
only applies if they don't understand that in English, identifying as X indicates that this word is being used in like not as a direct substitution for the literal spelling,
But remember, that's not the
right?
case we're talking about. And if you want to try to defend that kind of definition, where it's just one who takes on a given,
Right.
where the second use, we can talk about that because there's kind of like quibbles we have with that too. But that's not what our critique is pointing. So
Okay.
when you respond to the critique by pointing to that situation, I'm not saying this maliciously, but
Hmm.
it's like moving away from the topic because we're not applying our critique. I don't think it applies.
Oh,
We're
okay.
talking about the instance where the term is the same sense, definient, right?
Hmm.
Because if you say, because this is your response, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying
Hmm.
when the word woman is preceded by the words identifies as, we know
Hmm.
that that sense of the woman different prior sense. Now referring to just the label. Like that's the idea.
Yeah, I mean that would be I think that's a pretty accurate way of understanding, why I would say that. And to be fair, like again, it is possible that like, well, I don't know. I guess I can see the case, but I'm struggling to find like other examples where this would be like a meaningful stumbling block. I mean, I do recognize that language is really imperfect.
Well, you've mentioned
But
that once or twice, so let's just
yeah.
because like
Sure, sure. I would love that. Yeah.
you can just do
Yeah.
it with any term, like a black person is someone who identifies as a black person. Black person means the same thing in both contexts. It's not like in the definitions someone who has like this kind of like genetic up and skin color and culture and blah blah blah, right? It just means someone who identifies as black, nothing more. You get the exact same problem there. happen anywhere. Who identifies as gay, who identifies as straight, right?
Well,
Get
I
it?
would agree with that for gay and straight, by the way. I think those are perfectly valid. I think that those are also identifiers that know that to there is no meaningful way to determine like who is gay or straight outside of who says they are. Now, with race, I think there is some nuance there that makes it not a direct parallel, because for a number of reasons, but we don't really necessarily have to get into that if you don't want to. But with something like gay or straight, I would agree that that's true. It is the same definition would work for gay or straight as well, because it is also an identifier that only can be determined by the agent declaring the identifier.
We don't think it would apply in any of those. In the case of someone who's
Hmm.
gay, like we take gay to mean something like attracted to X. So someone says someone's using that kind of definition of gay. I don't think there's any regress at all. It's perfect term means. But if on the other hand, gay were just defined as someone who identifies as gay, no mention of same-sex attraction, there's nothing like that. Gay just means identifies as gay. Then you're going to get the same problem. If gay is someone who identifies as gay, then the very term we don't understand the meaning showing up in the
Well, I mean,
definitive.
I would agree depending on the context, right? Because like I do think that like there is with something um like gay, we have it has a much more limited use case than what woman would be, which is something that's like very close to one's like very core to one's identity. But I don't know. Like, I do think that like functionally saying that anybody who says they are gay can be reasonably understood to be gay, is perfectly fine.
No, we're not questioning
Wait,
that.
yeah, here.
But again, yeah,
Yeah.
but that's where my definition, like
Okay.
that's
There might be a
where the
misunderstanding about
purpose
what
of
we're
it.
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, we're talking past each other. Yeah, there seems to the confusion I think here is coming from. So there's a difference between how one goes about determining whether someone is X.
Mhm.
Um, that's not the kind of question we're talking about. That's what we would call an epistemic question.
Mhm.
Like, what do we go out and about the world to see if someone is X or fits into the category of X? Um,
And additionally, we think self-identification pretty reliable. Like,
Mhm.
I'm pretty generally speaking. If someone tells me they're gay, I'm gonna create some situation bad reason to suspect they're lying. But as a general rule, yeah, like I'm gonna take someone's identity, set their self-identification face value. But I don't think that when they identify as gay, they're identifying as someone who identifies as someone who identifies as someone who affinity, right? I think they're just identifying as someone who's attracted to the sex.
right, and the key point is how we would go about, like, if anyone had the goal of going about determining whether that individual was telling the truth or not. First of all, we would both take the view that that individual almost certainly is telling the truth, and we wouldn't question them,
Right.
Mhm.
unless we were claiming to have access to their mind or something, which would be insane. Um,
Right.
but the point, the more fundamental point is that how one can go about determining whether they fit into that category is a completely separate question to the question of whether that definition has meaning, right? So if one says, "Well, in this case, that's how we go about determining it." Well, that's a very separate question. How we go about determining it is an epistemic question. It's not.
Mhm.
This is a more fundamental question about how we
Well, but surely
define it.
though, you must recognize that in the framing of the conversation that we've set up, that there is sort of an maybe this is the wrong way of wording it, but there's sort of an epistemic assumption, right? Because the entire reason why you challenge the definition is out of a concern for how it might be used, correct? But
So,
then
well, twofold. I mean, it's twofold. So there's two motivating factors here. So the first motivating factor, first thing I mentioned is I'm interested in truth and I try to pursue the truth. And the truth is that I don't think that definition, as we've laid out, is a coherent definition. I don't think it has meaning. So that's one. And the second thing is the second motivation is not an. I wouldn't classify that as an epistemic motivation. It would be more of a moral motivation, where I see a potential liability for the trans community to be under attack. And
I don't really see that vulnerability, but I guess that is a different discussion than
yeah,
yeah. Which I mean, I'm okay to engage in that discussion as well. In fact, that's the sort of thing I usually would engage in.
right.
Is like whether I believe that to be the case. But
I want you to notice one saying.
right,
What we're saying has no entailment of how reliable someone self-identifies. That's just a separate
right,
question. You could accept everything that we're saying. Take it that self-identification as trans is reliable 90% of the time. Right? Nothing we're saying here actually conflicts with it. No, there's no entailment from here. Some percentage accuracy of self-identification trans, right? Hold our view and say everyone who identifies as trans is wrong, right? Or you could say everyone who identifies as trans is right. That's like a separate question about self-identifying correctly.
okay.
So I don't want you to think that if you grant what we're saying, then you're
No,
committed
I
to
don't
some
believe
weird.
that.
Yeah.
For the record, I
Oh,
don't believe
okay.
that. I do believe that there are many definitions that could lead into like troublesome territory, but I don't necessarily believe that like not accepting mine or whatever or the way that I use it is like literally never claim that. I don't believe that. I think that's ridiculous.
I think sorry.
I did want to. There was one question that was actually intriguing to me that came from chat. Do you mind if I ask it to you before we move on to the next part of this conversation? Because I think it's relevant.
If
Um,
it's from James, talking about it.
James, who's James? I don't know who James is. I
Oh,
don't even
okay.
think I've seen a James
Sure.
in chat.
No, that's fine then. Go ahead.
It's would you this question is would you mind asking Avi and Isaac if they think that using the use
Yeah,
and mention of a predicate.
that's James.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
That
okay. I mean,
that's
I just thought that was interesting. I don't know who James is, so I have no idea of your history.
that's the person spreading the sophistry. But what we're getting at
Spreading the
is
sophistry.
yeah, we have some history there. Um,
Okay.
but what we're getting at, I think we've actually made a good bit of progress. It like maybe a good bit is overstating it, but you seem to like sometimes you mention the replacement case and you seem to actually be picturing the kind of thing we're talking about, where you have this like repeated kind of substitution on term as it shows up in opinions. Like it sounds like you're picturing the kind of thing we're saying right there.
Of course, yeah,
And
I don't disagree that these things exist. I just don't know if it applies in this case personally. I don't know that it does. Or I mean, I think that it could conceivably, but I don't think that it like um generally would or nor do I think that that necessarily like rules out the usefulness or the sensicality of the definition I used. Is what I'm saying.
okay, so
Yeah.
well,
I think there are a lot of I think there's a lot of things like this that would be that are very hard to determine. And most of those are forms of identity. Someone in chat has brought up about Christians. The fans thing is another one where these are admittedly very difficult things to define because they are, excuse me, matters of personal declaration. Now, it is possible there is another working definition that could be more clear. Like, for example, perhaps um, saying something like I don't know, like a woman is a gender identity, and a gender identity is something that you can declare for yourself, and that may be clearer and also avoid those things. But
well we're
again,
going to
I'm
give
not
you our
entirely sure.
picture because you asked a
Sure.
while
Oh,
ago.
yeah, please do, please do. Sorry
Because
about that. Go ahead.
that might help. So I should say at the outset that there's a lot of vagueness, a lot of these,
Of course.
etc.
Yeah.
So that needs to be
I think
said.
that gender as a general like, if we're talking about its use in the world, I think it is utterly incoherent. I don't think anybody knows what they mean when they say it. I think that most of the time people will have conversations about it, and they will unintentionally, like, totally not even sometimes they won't even notice that they're using different meanings of the same word while they're discussing these concepts because
Yeah,
it is
like the
so
sex
messy.
gender equivocation is
Yep.
obviously
Constant.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
Constant.
so
think there's one thing I really think we should clear up, and that's like I just want to clear up that vagueness and incoherence are very different things. So
yeah, of
something
course.
can be, yeah. So like incoherence, we take that to just mean lacking any meaning.
Well, I don't
There
think
could be,
I think even you've admitted though that it doesn't lack any meaning. It just means that in a certain circumstance, it could be interpreted as a nonsensical thing, but it doesn't necessarily.
Well,
Because
if
you've
it does,
admitted that there are
okay.
others, that there are reasonable use cases, given that English functions the way that it does, that a woman is someone who identifies as a woman is not a completely meaningless term. It can
If
absolutely
it's
have contextual,
if it's equivocating the terms, then
right, but
yes. But we're talking
clearly,
about when it's not equivoc when
well,
it's not.
but who's to say that anybody even uses it like that? Like again, I struggle to imagine a case in which that would be the case. But maybe if somebody didn't have like an understanding of English in general, that could be a problem. But I
Well,
feel like rewording there would solve that.
the problem is that or anything people
Mhm.
are liable to like I'm getting the picture when I talk to you that your definition isn't actually regressive. It's just pretty reasonable misinterpret how you frame it. Sounds like you're saying woman is someone who takes on a particular basically. But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
but phrasing very easily.
Sure. I
Okay, and
mean,
under that interpretation, which we understand that's not how you're meaning the term. But under okay, wait.
well,
First, I wanted to answer. You asked a while ago.
right.
Okay, so
Yeah,
she's
and I just want to say, like, I just the only thing I'm really contesting is the idea that that is meaningless or incoherent because you've both acknowledged that that is not the case. But there are certain specific use cases where it could be interpreted that way. But I believe that at the end of the day, that's going to be a matter of largely a matter of charitability. But I am open to the idea that there is a better way of wording it that isn't necessarily weak to that potential opening.
yeah. We don't think that this applies to all definitions. That's another kind of common misunderstanding. We think that there's some kind of trap that you get into your definition self-identification. It's like under any definition. Not taking a view like talking about a very
Right.
specific kind of move. One
Right.
that it looked like you may have been making. Fair enough.
And I
You
think
want to
again,
say
that would be a lot of that would be a matter of charitability, right? Which I would argue, of course, now we're not going to get into it, but I would argue that there was a significant amount of uncharitability going around that conversation.
I don't think that we
Um,
were uncharitable
no,
in a way
I don't
there.
think you were, no, but I just mean I'm saying in general, and I do think that if there is potential vagueness in a definition, as you mentioned, is not necessarily the same thing as incoherence, but that vagueness is going to be a matter of a lot of it's going to be charitability, and that is a problem with language in general. There is a lot of things that can be said that aren't necessarily like don't make sense, but that could be interpreted one way or another.
Well,
Anyway, that's kind of a side note.
no, it's
I
okay.
just wanted
So,
to,
The most
hopefully,
common usage of the incoherent one would be the use definition. So a woman use is anyone who identifies as a woman use in the use sense in both terms, in both
Avi,
cases.
Avi, let's
Yeah.
also clear up for what we're talking. So again, I think a lot of these terms are very fishy, right? But
of course.
I think this is the kind of way we would try to. I guess we'll go. It's going to kind of by parallel reasoning apply to others.
Sure.
So yeah, we would broadly speaking agree that there are a lot of traits that we associate masculine, feminine. That seems kind of uncontroversial. Talk about masculine, ask people what they associate with that, and you give them have like riding a Harley Davidson or dress.
Sure.
Like people categorize it pretty easy.
Yeah.
Sure, we
Absolutely.
agree.
Massive, totally like a massive different amount of traits that vary completely
Yes.
depending on time, your culture, everything. It's unbelievably massive. Yes, I
Right.
agree.
Yeah. Exactly. So with um with gender, we're just gonna say that something roughly like being a woman is just having 50% of the uh gender trait. That's like the kind of way.
This includes, by the way, this includes mental traits.
Of
And I
course.
don't know if I would say having over 50%. I think it may be a vague predicate where
Sure.
like I
Might
wouldn't
be a
take
sororities case. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, sororities. I view it as a sororities case.
Okay, and
Um
just to be clear, let's just clear up what that is. So Demon Mom, I don't know, you've probably actually heard of this, just maybe not by name. Sororities cases are things like when does a grain of sand become a pile by adding more sand? when does a puddle become a lake? The idea is like, how are we going to cash that out? There's different solutions in philosophy without, rabbit hole. People who take like epistemicist position and say there is a drop that when you add it, that's when it becomes a lake, right? There's other people who want to try to use like fuzzy logic here. There's
Well,
like,
I mean, a lake. I think lakes have. Well, I guess yes. If you're talking drop by drop, that would be rather complicated,
it's
or
it's a, it's
perhaps
a serious
impossible.
philosophical problem. Like the idea is no one thinks puddles and lakes don't exist, but finding the exact flip over difficult.
Well, I mean, but
And
wouldn't you argue that like in a case like that, it might be better to just come up with more accurate terms rather than using these like inherently contextual and flawed colloquialisms? Like it might be better to just come up with like literally just say like a I don't know, like a Z lake. A Z lake is could be like a scientific definition of, or even just say scientific lake. A scientific lake is exactly this or exactly that, whereas that would be very very much contained for use in scientific contexts, where it wouldn't be useful to try and to impose that definition on all uses of the word lake, but it could for very specific contexts, like where it's very important to determine the difference between a lake and a puddle. You could use an alternate term that refers to the same thing but with like a clearer cut definition, right?
yeah, so if there's possibility for more clarity, probably pretty much always a good, unless it comes at some other huge cost. But the only reason I
Um,
mentioned it, yeah,
Well,
more.
I would argue that in the vast, vast majority of cases where you're discussing a puddle versus a lake, there is no need for that level of granularity. That
Sure,
people being able
totally
to
agree.
say that's a puddle because it's a small body of water and that's a lake because it's a really big one, is it will have no effect, literally no noticeable effect on anybody's usage of those terms.
Yeah,
But
that's
there might be specific cases where it is important to have that level of granularity.
I don't think we disagree really about this. It's just an analogy because what the reason that it got mentioned, I was saying there's a big amount of gender traits. We all agree with that, and then I said we're just gonna say someone's a woman. They have over and
Well, but then doesn't
well,
that
wait a
have
sec, wait a sec.
okay, okay, sure, sure.
And Avi just replied to that by saying, well, it is kind of a Sorites case, so maybe there's some philosophy work. So I was just, but
Yeah,
but
because I
overall,
wouldn't take the view. Yeah, I wouldn't take the 50-50. I'm not an epistemicist on the topic.
right, and
Yeah,
and
see,
that
like,
that's
that's the type of definition I would oppose, like, pretty strongly, and there's a number of reasons why I would oppose using a definition like that, and I think there's, like, a number of angles to come at it, but, I realize I may have cut you off there. I couldn't tell if you're finished or not. Did you have another thing you wanted to say with that, or
well, I just wanted to clarify the kind of way we're don't. I mean,
Alright.
the idea you have to have exactly. I said it something roughly like the idea you have to have exactly qualify as woman. I mean, we don't have to have that there. The idea is just spectrum of traits, and it's about having are on one side or the other. That's like the kind of
And
way.
can I just add to that? Like, I think this is a really, really important thing. You don't have to weight all the traits equally. There are some traits that can be weightier than others.
Sure.
And one of some of those traits I include, in fact, I absolutely include, are mental traits.
Mm,
And so just like when Isaac gave examples of like riding a Harley or wearing a dress, those are not mental
right.
traits, but there are also mental traits which many people will associate with some sort of um, masculinity or femininity or neither, right? So it's not a binary association either, and those are mental traits. And so our definition wouldn't actually lead people, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because just to drive home the point that our definition wouldn't lead people to say, oh well, by the definition you are not what you're saying you are, because you would need access to some to make that determination. It seems like you would need access to someone's mental traits.
Well, to me, now to me, this seems like a significantly less useful or significantly more vague definition than the one that was was opposed that I gave that was opposed to. And maybe this is then we're going to get into the matter of like rhetoric, but with a definition like a woman has over 50% of female traits. So like there's a couple
Oh
of
wait, don't commit us to. Again, I said,
oh, okay. So
talk
like
about we're just talking about
a
having some kind of a fall on one
So would it be
side.
fair to say that like a woman is a person who has a majority of female traits?
Well,
Is that like an accurate
that's just another way
summation?
of saying 51, right? So,
Well, okay, but I mean, like, where do you want to draw it?
well,
The ball is in your court now to make a
I
definition.
think the point Avi just doesn't. It's not actually even necessarily about amount of traits because have majority traits were highly weighted. That might tip you over
Okay.
onto the male. The idea is just
So
that series of and it's kind of like aggregation rate has some weight, positive or negative number. Just add up all the ones you have, and you get some result. It's like if that's far enough, you are that gender.
so
Or on that
there's a
side of the
couple of
spectrum, there's also nothing about compatible with binarity.
well, I mean, it would basically mean that you would have to have a completely different definition for non-binary, right?
So
Because
No.
I
if
think
well,
there's
hold on,
confusion.
let me just be clear real quick. I have a question. So is it I want to understand what your definition was because we worked from my like very like solid definition and I want to just make sure we have one for yours as well, which is and again, feel free to correct me at all. But if it's not about 50%, whatever, a woman is someone who has female traits.
I think that there's been a confusion because I think that might take it that we're arguing somehow against non-binarity. If you
No, no,
get
no, I'm
some,
not. All I'm trying to do here is understand what the working definition that you're suggesting here is and how we can like sort of work from there. I want to be able to have a conversation about it. I promise you, like I'm not engaging in this trying to like got you or anything. I just
I
want to
didn't say
understand.
that. I didn't say that. I
Right,
just
right.
thought that you were impression that that's against binarity.
No, I
I
do
s-
think there are some problems with this definition in how you would then
okay,
apply it to
wait a second.
non-binary people, but we can get there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's very easy some like modification on that statement and just, like
Sure, sure.
create some range. It's like you have like percent this kind of trait and 70% that kind, then binary, right? Like there's nothing that's gonna stop us from some kind of like classes for binary people. But okay, this is also I'm gonna have to leave Avi and Mary. As much as I do, I just have. But what
Oh,
yeah, I know. But I'm happy to do another. But Avi can end my. But
okay.
I just want to clarify. Just want to clarify that. So I don't. I thought it would be helpful for us to provide an understanding how we use rough understanding. But I'm
Mhm.
sensitive to that becoming the whole discussion because
Right. This is
we
what I
can
was afraid of,
yeah
actually. Like,
well yeah my instinct was it'll be helpful because you'll see that our definition is going to capture virtually all the same talking about as trans if not literally.
I
Sorry, just one sec. So sorry, I don't mean to be rude. So
no, no, it's fine, it's fine.
that was why I initially thought it would be worth mentioning how we think about the trans. I thought you'd okay, even though we're talking differently, the actual people who classify as trans or binary are pretty much not literally like the same. But it sounds like now we're cascading into problems with other definitions. So we can do a maybe we'll have to do more conversation. We can do something about that. But just all I really want to hammer home is just the kind of point about the progressive definition. I just want to be
Okay.
totally clear. The problem we're raising, if you say woman is someone who identifies as a woman, there's no
Mhm.
equivocation, right? It's not that woman in one case refers it fine just as a label, and in the other case it has this definition. No equivocation. If you say a woman is someone who identifies as a woman, same meaning in cases, then if someone's not sure what's meant by woman, they ask, what? Wait, I don't understand your definition because it uses the very term I don't understand the meaning of. Can you clarify what the word woman means when it? They say, oh,
Yeah,
it
I
means
could.
this. One, I want to complete. So they
Okay.
say, yeah, it means the exact same thing as it means in the definiendum. So then they go one layer into the progression, right? They go, okay, so a woman is someone who identifies as someone who identifies. But in the definitions of the term woman used in the definitions, the original term, right? What does that mean? Well, it means the same thing as originally. Okay, and then you go 3 layers into right. A woman is someone who identifies as someone who identifies as a woman. Right. We're still so the person who doesn't understand is still sitting there going, okay, I see that it's someone who identifies as this thing, but I still don't know what this thing is. What does that mean? And then you say, oh, it means the same thing as originally. They go, okay, so it's someone who identifies as something, someone who identifies as someone who identifies as someone who identifies as this thing I don't know the meaning. What is that? And it's just going to repeat out. So I want to be clear about just 1 or 2 things because I'm going to have to go, and I don't mean to be rude because I really appreciate you having me on. I just have all this fucking discrete structured stuff to do. For some reason, I always think these will be faster and easier than they are, and then it's like, okay, wait, we have to have a whole.
It's a ridiculously complex subject, so
Yeah,
don't
so
worry about it. I understand if you got other stuff you got to do.
Yeah, that was probably naive on my part, but either way, so that's the kind of problem I'm pointing to, and I just want to be perfectly clear. We're only raising that for the kind of definition that uses both terms the same way, definition, opinions, and additionally, if you I know I've said this already, but I just want to say the way you spoke in that debate gave us that impression. Now, we're not trying to be uncharitable. And now that we know,
no, I don't think you are.
But now that we know what you mean, that you're not doing that. But it was able to be read like that by fair-minded, right? And again, so I just want to clarify, we're not trying to hold you to definitions you don't agree with, but we're pointing out problem is with that interpretation. That was an interpretation people kind of like within reason to take there. If you want to kind of say your anything final to me before I go, I'll totally.
Yeah, I just think I do. I think that if you were to, I do think that if there was, I mean, presuming again, I'm not a linguist, so there may be some other thing that I'm not catching on to, but I acknowledge that there are cases where it could be interpreted that way. However, I personally believe that's sort of a limitation of English that's very, very hard to avoid. And most of this will boil down to charitability and also could be dispelled very easily by simply restating or reframing the question pretty simply without any major implications whatsoever to the rhetoric or otherwise. It's as simple as, oh, I don't understand exactly what you're saying. Okay, well, let me try wording it another way. However, I recognize that there are potential interpretations of that sentence that could be flawed, and perhaps there's a better way of ultimately wording the exact same sentiment. So yeah, as long as we can acknowledge that the sort of initial claim that my argument was incoherent is not entirely accurate, and then I think there's some synthesis here. But I do completely agree. I agree that there are contexts, or at least there are versions of that statement which could be incorrect. I just don't know if that is the. I would contest the idea that that's the only way it can be interpreted, and even the idea that it would be predominantly interpreted that way. I think that some people, again, we don't need to really hash out the original debate, but I think it would have been much better if that was a planned debate instead of something off the cuff. But yes, yeah.
Well, DM, thanks for having me on again. Sorry to if it's okay, I'm just gonna mute and stay here to capture for Avi. And I don't know when your patience will be, but I assume you can talk for at least.
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of other things I need to do tonight, but we can talk for a bit longer. I mean, again, this is a topic that's interesting to me, and this has been a very nice conversation, so.
Yeah, and I'll add, I'm of course happy to follow up. You send me a friend request, I'll accept that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can always follow up again. Yeah, thanks for the chat. I'll let Avi and my have a good day, and just leave me in this chat muted so I can capture it for Avi, please.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Yep. Yeah, I'll disconnect you once we're done.
Awesome, perfect.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah. So okay, so this is good. We're making progress. So
Sure.
So what I take it that we agree on at this point is that definitions that don't equivocate, that is, that they are circular in the sense that they use the definiendum in the definiens without any equivocations. So they mean the same thing in the same sense. Those are regressive definitions.
Well, wouldn't those be a very specific case? I don't know that I don't even know where you would who would use that? Where would anybody use that?
Well,
It's implied
ignoring
in.
who would, Well, ignoring who would use it, like, do we agree that those definitions would lead to a regress?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I said before.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think if I mean, again, I'm not a linguist, so but as far as I can tell, yes, that makes sense. A in those specific cases, if you were trying to use the use case and the use case versus the mention case and the mention case, which I kind of get, but I and I understand the basic concept there, but I'm again not a linguist, so there may be something I'm not understanding exactly about this. Then yeah, I would agree. There are some cases in which that's the case. I
Yeah.
will
So
note, however,
sure.
as I have, that their original claim was that my definition was incoherent, and I think it's fair for you to say no, it isn't actually incoherent. It's just vague.
Oh, sure. So, well, I don't have a problem with vagueness.
Yeah.
If what you mean is a use mention or a mention use type definition, um, then I do not think your definition is incoherent. Um, yeah, and I have no problem saying that.
Excellent.
In fact, I want to say that. Now, there may be some. That doesn't mean there aren't issues with definitions. I mean, it's and which is a whole different discussion. That's so. This is like so. I think this is very productive because
Mhm.
the first call that we're doing, and I do think we should have another call and another talk about
Sure.
the meat of the heart of the issue, which is okay. Well, now that we've gotten the incoherent definitions off the table, well, not to say that you've had one to begin with, because
Fair.
yeah. So and so I am happy, delighted to see that that the definition you're using is use mention or mention use. Although I do still take issue with it for other reasons, but that is the future discussion that I'd like to have,
Sure.
which is which is um, can we explore the label, the the use mention type definitions, and see if there are any critiques to that, versus if we would to have a characteristic, mental or otherwise based definition, which may be more vague, but may come at less of a cost of reductios. So I want to be clear that I don't have any problem with vagueness. Vagueness
Mhm.
happens all the time. There's a whole topic on vagueness if you want to look into it.
Oh, of
Vague
course.
predicates.
I mean, we came up with a great example of that with the difference between a lake and a pond, or a
Yeah,
lake and a puddle.
yeah. And even if you want
We
to
use
like
it
make
constantly. Yeah.
yeah, and you'll notice that even if you want to make like more refined definitions for lake versus puddle, like if you want to index it to like how many molecules of water are in each one,
Mhm.
like there'll always be, like, not always, but there'll be many examples between those two refined definitions or those four refined definitions,
Probably, yeah.
et cetera, until you get down to like the very discrete molecular level, until like, there's only like X amount of water molecules between these two definitions that are becoming more and more refined. And it'll get to a point where there's more definitions that you'll be able to mentally handle in our own minds,
Well,
just
yeah,
because,
I
yeah.
would say that's like that is a like a perhaps a fuzzy limitation, but it is a limitation to human knowledge, right? Like, I mean, we only have we are ultimately organic instruments. We don't we
Right.
have limitations. Yeah, and I do think
Right.
that's a real problem, but I don't know that there's actually like I don't think there's an answer to that necessarily besides doing our best. I think it's
Yeah.
very difficult to try and like come up with universally like any sort of universally applicable definitions, but we can certainly try to come to better ones and whatnot.
Sure. And the
Um,
only reason I make this point is because there's always going to be the topic of vagueness that's going to come up because of these limitations. There's always going to be our knowledge, like even if we try to refine the definition of lake and try to refine the definition of puddle, there will be, unless our minds like become some sort of like crazy supercomputer or whatever, there's always going to be these issues of vagueness.
mhm,
And that's okay. It's okay for those issues to come up. There's different views on vagueness. So I'm okay with vagueness. So vagueness and incoherence are very different.
mhm,
Um, you can have like ridiculously vague definition and it can be coherent.
mhm.
And you can, but if you have an incoherent definition, I take that to mean that it just has no meaning. So there's an incoherence vagueness distinction.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, So that's so I think this is actually a really good, because we made so much progress. I think this is a good, like, part 1.
Okay.
Um, if you'd be willing to have, like, a part 2 on, like, okay, now that we've gotten, now that we're clear on, you know, um,
What we're meaning
uh,
and whatnot.
yeah, what we're meaning, what we're not meaning. Well, now that we're clear on, like, why we don't want to use, like, we're not going to use definitions in the same sense as the definitions. Um, we can say, okay, well, now how let's take a look at how do we define gender, and what definitions can we come up with, and what may be certain issues with certain definitions for a future talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be very interested in that because I will say I have like a number of issues with the definition, even the like sort of offhand definition that was proposed,
Mhm.
that I think would be perhaps perhaps we can learn from each other on that. In that I think there are a lot of problems with attempting to define woman or womanhood as an identity around uh like sexed traits, either visible or invisible. There's like a lot of, in my opinion, there's a lot of issues with that. And I wouldn't agree with the idea that like that sort of definition would include the same number of people that would in mine. In fact, I think it would be drastically different. Um, in addition to potentially introducing other issues down the line. But I don't believe that's like anything necessarily intentional or even like necessarily malicious. But they are nonetheless issues that I would take with those types of definitions. And also, something that I've thought about extensively in why I use the definition that I use versus others. Having, I mean, I've been I've been out as a trans person for 10 years. So I've had a lot of these discussions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. I'll just, like, one point I'll just make is that it doesn't have to strictly be sexed traits. It doesn't. They don't have to be. Like, we can talk about, like, sex and gender. Like, we can talk about both of those things, like, on end. But, like, the traits can be atomized. And they can be discretely atomized in and of themselves. They don't have to. Um, it may be easier in some senses to say, like, okay, well, here are some traits that are correlated with certain sexes. Um,
Sure.
but that's not actually necessarily something one needs to do to have a characteristic based definition of gender. Um, Having a characteristic based definition of gender, or trait based, it could just be based on traits or characteristics. And in it,
Well, but
yeah.
you do realize that like well, see, and this is something that I have with that angle of one is that uh a in my opinion, that approach of having like a characteristic based definition of gender, whereas gender is an identity, means that inherently are declaring what someone else is or isn't based on traits. Even if they're like invisible traits, well, then at that point, you've crossed into a line of something that's completely invisible. And you can't determine those invisible things. And therefore, that definition stops being useful in a social sense, and therefore and definitions exist for social use, so you run into that issue in my opinion. I the
I would
reason
just
why
say, yeah, this is getting into this other talk, but I would disagree with that. I would also just make just really clear, like, it doesn't mean that I would be declaring what someone is or what someone isn't. In fact, the characteristic based definition, if anything, would I can't stress this more hardly enough, because it includes, which are extremely important, mental characteristics. Unless I have a mind reading machine
well,
or
right.
something like that, there's no way on this definition that would lead me to conclude that, anyone is something that they say they're not.
Well, I just wonder then why use that definition over mine if both have potential flaws and one
Mhm.
is more accurate, if perhaps in certain edge cases slightly harder to explain. Why
Yeah.
would you how is that sort of a definition any less vulnerable to exploitation than the original definition that I brought
I
up?
think that's an excellent, cliffhanger for our future talk, Demon Mama.
I see. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, that's
Yeah.
fine. I'm very interested in having that talk at some point. To be honest, I figured that would be where this conversation would go. But I guess, we spent a lot of time sort of sorting out what my definition was, and sort of critiquing and digging into that, which I'm perfectly fine with. I think this was a very interesting conversation. And yeah, I would look forward to having another conversation with you at some point in the future about alternate definitions, which, just so you know, is, excuse me, something that I am very invested in, both personally and politically. The definition, the definitions that win out in the public mind have a existential impact on myself and the communities that I care about. So that's something I'm very, very interested in discussing, and that sort of thing is much more what I usually talk about. I usually talk about the political and not so much the formal logic of a lot of these things.
Right.
Well, though I do admit there are many cases where those things are interconnected. So yeah.
Sure. Okay. So this was I found this to be very productive. One thing that I'll ask, and I'll just ask this because I am Riley's friend. Like, do you and I'm sure you've gotten this question like a lot.
Mhm.
Like, do you see any path forward with you two? Um,
Well, it
in terms of
literally isn't
resolution?
in my hands. I was blocked the moment that the conversation ended. Well, not literally the moment, but within minutes of the conversation ending. So I don't know how that would be possible. And if I'm completely honest, Riley's choices in the week after that debate were what I would characterize as nothing short of um like disinformation and dishonesty, like to an incredible degree. And so while I recognize, and literally in my video, I only did one video on this because it was getting out of control, the amount of harassment and claims that were being projected about me all over the place. um I made one video, which admittedly is imperfect. You know, I only had so much time to put together the video. But in this video, I stated that I do believe there was a lot that went wrong in that conversation. Of course, obviously. Yeah, it was a character assassination. Yeah, absolutely. I believe that is an accurate assessment of what followed. Um, but yeah, I in my one video I stated, I think there were things that were wrong with the conversation. It was a conversation I tried to end multiple times. I realized we both got heated at various moments. Um, but it is in the follow up, I have literally not even had the opportunity to respond to most of the things that have been said about me. Meanwhile, Riley has functionally gone on a a tour of the internet saying and asserting things about me that ascended to the level of accusing me of being a transphobe. Something I never did back to her. I also never asserted that her definition was wrong or irresponsible. Those things were never done on my part. Those were only from her camp. And so, though uh, I consider Riley a friend, and while I think that initial conversation was unfortunate, for sure, and there were flaws on both sides of our conversation, the behavior afterwards um is nothing short of just like raw aggression.
Well, let's.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it seems like there's a lot of hurt on both sides, and there's a lot of like, um,
But
understanding that the other side is being unfair. Like, I mean, I understand. Like, no, don't get me. I'm not challenging anything you're saying right now. Like, I'm not
sure.
because I don't know. I don't know. Here's the thing. Like, I'm not in the thick of it.
Fine.
And because
I
I'm not
just
in the
the
thick
thing is
of
that there has been at the best, when I am most treated charitably, there has been at best a both sidesing of an issue that is objectively not a both sides issue. Um on Monday, after the debate, I stepped back and said, "Listen, like that was a fight with a friend. Like that kind of sucks. I didn't really want that to happen. I didn't expect it to happen. Whatever happened in the conversation is bad." And I said, "All right, we're unlisting the VOD. We're going to let this sit. We're going to cool down on it and maybe we'll talk about it in the future." I then found out that I was blocked, had been blocked on every platform. And what followed was a one-way um campaign, like 7, 8 videos long campaign that it started with saying things, making claims about me that I don't believe were accurate, and progress into making claims about me that I know that are verifiably completely false.
So here's
And
no. So here's the thing, like, because this is the thing, like, if I were to, I can only imagine if I were to talk to Riley, I'm sure Riley would tell me like the same thing, and like you would dispute that, and she would dispute that. So what I propose, and maybe I'm just like going being over maybe I'm being too hopeful here, but would you be willing, and I can ask the same question of Riley. I haven't asked her yet. If there could be some type of attempt to resolve this drama between you two, maybe even like in a private mediated type of setting where maybe like we could put all of this to an end.
I mean, for me, I've been waiting for an end since Monday. So yeah, of course. But what I won't accept is I won't accept a sort of like status quo like settlement of just like, oh yeah, we're okay now, because what was and I don't like, I recognize you're not in the thick of it, but it is a matter of fact that our behavior in the follow-up of the talk, regardless of how intense the talk got, was unlike anything I've ever received from any other person in my life, publicly, like, ever. And it was a absolutely ridiculous level of aggression, a ridiculous level of irresponsible rhetoric, and completely outright false claims about me. And sure, she can claim, people can claim whatever. You can, like, it you can always say, like, it's a he said, she said, whatever situation. But this is not a matter of just that. There is verifiable, like, record that is public of how differently we handled this, and how the way that she handled it was like, going so far as to agree with people who believe that my platform should be destroyed. That is not someone who I'm willing to just, like, that is not a level where I'm just willing to just say, ah, let bygones be bygones.
The only reason I'm like interjecting when I say like I'm not in the thick of it is because like there's always two sides to obviously there's
Of
always two
course.
sides to every story, and
And one
I,
person's side
yeah.
has been told, and the others has been predominantly neglected due to the context of the situation. And one person has look, I don't want to characterize it, but one person has objectively, regardless of how you characterize it, gone on multiple shows to tell their side of the story to large audiences, while the other side of the story has not been able to do that, and did not seek that sort of, like, did not actively seek that out. I was offered one opportunity to try and speak my mind on it after days of being accused of being a transphobe and a bunch of other things. And I feel personally like a lot of lies have been said about me. So I realize what's trying to be said, but it is a situation where I think that the literal public record, it would be easy for me to verify in just a couple of seconds. In fact, I can tell you right now, simply go and look at what videos were done about and about of and about the actual drama on each of our channels.
So
One.
yeah, sure. So
Mine.
the thing so again, like I just would, this is, so when I'm asking if like you'd be willing to have like a mediated conversation, like I'm sure like if Riley were here, like she would have things to say about that. You'd have things to say back to her.
I would be
I don't
shocked.
have anything to
I would be
say.
shocked. I would be shocked to hear what she would have to say about me. Because
Well, I'm just
so
all I'm
far,
well, here's the thing, like regardless of any of that, like I don't have anything to say because I can't speak for her.
I don't.
And
I recognize.
I wouldn't have
expect
anything
you
to say to her because wait, what?
No, I said I understand, and by the way, just in case there's any lack of clarity, I wouldn't expect you to.
Right. So
Yeah.
all I'm trying to do here, the only thing I'm trying to do here is try to pave a way for some sort of resolution. Like that's all I'm trying to do, and
Yeah. And I
and
appreciate
that's
that.
that would be my. I'm sorry, what? I didn't hear.
Oh no, sorry. I apologize. I'm not trying to do like crosstalk or anything. I appreciate that. I was just saying a side statement.
Okay. I all so yeah, so all that's my goal. My goal isn't like to hear your side and then to bring it back to her and hear her side and bring it back to you. And like my goal is like what can I what I'm thinking of is like, okay, this is a very unfortunate situation. The events that happen are not what I would like them to be, not what a lot of people would like them to be. And it's torn a good part of the community. And so I'm
Yeah.
just since I'm friends with Riley, and since I'm developing a rapport with you, I'm just thinking what I can do to try to facilitate some sort of resolution. And I think a lot of that probably is would not be good to have on stream. Probably it'll be some sort of private setting. Um, but maybe I could be wrong. But I don't know.
No,
I'm
I
just
agree with you, by the way, and, but I agree with you that, like, I would much prefer to have would have preferred to have had a private one, and I would have to think about how I would approach a private conversation at this point because, if I'm completely honest, I don't trust that if we had a private conversation that the next day I wouldn't have a video out on me about that would is just lying about what I did in private. Do you see where like I'm opening myself up now to further uh attacks from someone who has shown that not just once, but like 7, 8 times, hours upon hours of content has been willing to be verifiably dishonest about me. And like I don't just mean in a little way. I mean I have all of the receipts on this issue. And when I say that, like, I wish it was something as simple. I wish that she could have reached out to me Monday night and said, "Hey, let's talk tomorrow and let's fucking work this out," because I think we would have paved everything over. But what's happened is that, while I agree a private conversation would be the way to sort this sort of thing, she's gone on a lot of other people's platforms, including some people who are very hostile to me, but that's just a piece of context, but to many different people's platforms in order to tell her side of the story. Um, while I was blocked, while I literally could not be open to any sort of potential work like workout.
okay.
So, but I am open. I'm
Yes.
open to it, but I would need to consider that very carefully
There,
given the
there's
context.
ways. There can be stipulations such that we can provide certain protections or insurance for that kind of feared situation
Yeah, I
within
mean,
private
if that's
conversations.
possible, like if we want to have like a mod from your community, a mod from my community, sure. Um, like if we want to have
Well, I
mods
think all the
whose
mod. I think just like I think all the mod. I don't even know if like I would be the mod because I would want all the mods to be very neutral. Like I don't want like I don't want like this one thing where like someone from like one side comes and the other person from another side comes. Like I'd really like neutral platform,
maybe
like a
we could
neutral like
maybe we
neutral
could
medium. Yeah.
we could have a private recorded conversation where we
Yeah.
both agree to not release the video, and that way
Exactly.
there's a mutually assured destruction situation. So
Yeah,
maybe,
and if and again, I
but
haven't asked this to
yeah,
Riley, so this Riley could just say, I don't know, like, and so like this is me just thinking out loud, because I just want to, I would really much like to see resolution. That's all. If not, if that's not a possibility, then I would just like to. We can just go on and talk about, and we could do this either way, to have the conversation about well, what are the problems with different formulations of gender and why one definition would be better than the other.
absolutely. I mean, again, I am open to the possibility. Again, pardon me, and this is just I'll be completely upfront. There is some trust issues there at this point, but that doesn't mean I'm close to it. So you can take that as my message or whatever you want to do. I'm struggling with the words right
Yeah.
now, but you understand what I mean. And also, I
Yeah,
am
yeah, no, I
very
get it.
open
Yeah.
to further discussion on this. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, listen, it was great talking with you, Demi Mama. Thanks
Likewise, it
for
was really interesting.
and I hope that we can have a future conversation about gender in the future. And I also and I'll just say it again. I really do hope there is a path to genuine resolution.
I hope so too. That would be great. Thank you for coming on, Avi, and looking forward to talking with you again in the future.
All right. Thanks so much, Demi Mama. Take care.
Bye for now.